I stood at the edge of my father's retirement party, champagne flute trembling in my hand, and watched him tell 300 guests that I was the one mistake he couldn't fix. The ballroom went quiet. My wife's fingers found mine. And I realized that after 32 years of waiting for his approval, I was about to stop asking for it, because tucked in my jacket pocket was a signed acquisition agreement that made me his boss, and he had no idea. The Riverside Hotel ballroom smelled like lilies and expensive whiskey. Crystal chandeliers threw soft light across white tablecloths, and a jazz quartet played something smooth in the corner. I adjusted my tie for the third time and scanned the crowd. Executives from Morrison & Fletcher, the manufacturing firm my father had built over 4 decades, clustered in small groups, laughing too loud and clinking glasses. My mother stood near the dessert table in her navy dress, smiling that practiced smile she'd perfected over years of corporate events. My wife Emma squeezed my hand. "You okay?" she whispered. Her green eyes searched mine. "Getting there," I said. The envelope in my pocket felt like it weighed 10 pounds. I'd flown in from Seattle 2 days ago, telling my parents I wanted to be here for Dad's big night. The truth was more complicated. 6 months of conference calls with private equity firms, 3 rounds of due diligence, and 1 very discreet negotiation had led to this moment. Morrison & Fletcher was mine now. The board had signed off on Tuesday. My father just didn't know it yet. Emma and I made our way through the crowd. People I barely recognized shook my hand and asked about the tech company I'd founded. "Doing well," I said each time, keeping it vague. Dad never wanted to hear about my work. He'd made that clear when I was 22 and told him I wasn't joining the family business. "Tech is a fad, Owen," he'd said back then, dismissing 10 years of my computer science passion with a wave of his hand. "Real men build things you can hold." I'd built a software platform that streamlined supply chain logistics. Last year, we were acquired by a Fortune 500 for enough money that I could have retired at 32. Instead, I'd reinvested everything into this, buying the company that had defined my father's identity and in many ways my childhood. A hand clapped my shoulder. I turned to find Uncle Ray, my father's younger brother, grinning. "There he is, the prodigal son returns." "Hey, Uncle Ray," I managed a smile. Ray had always been kinder than my father, but he'd never intervened when things got rough at family dinners. "Your old man's over there holding court," Ray said, nodding toward the far side of the room. "Probably telling the story about the Detroit contract again." "Probably," I said. Emma excused herself to find the restroom, and I moved toward the bar, needing something stronger than champagne. The bartender poured me a scotch, and I stood there, watching my father from across the room. Calvin Morrison, 6'2", still broad-shouldered at 65, silver hair combed back in that same style he'd worn since the 80s. He laughed at something a colleague said, head thrown back, king of his domain. I remembered being 8 years old, sitting in his office after school, coloring at the small table in the corner while he worked. He'd seemed like a giant then, powerful and untouchable. I'd wanted so badly to impress him. I'd show him my drawings, rockets, robots, spaceships, and he'd glance over, nod once, and return to his blueprints. "Very nice, Owen, now let Daddy work." That was the pattern. I'd bring home straight A's, and he'd ask why I wasn't captain of the soccer team. I'd win a state science fair, and he'd mention that so-and-so's kid was already interning at engineering firms. Nothing was ever quite enough. The microphone squeaked. I turned to see the company president, Harold Chen, tapping it. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The room quieted. Emma slipped back to my side. "We're here tonight to celebrate a titan of industry," Harold began, launching into a speech about my father's accomplishments. The numbers were impressive. 42 years with the company, 30 as CEO, revenue growth from 12 million to over 600 million, expansion into 14 states. My father stood beside the podium, nodding graciously. When Harold finished, Dad took the microphone. The applause was thunderous. Thank you, he said, waiting for quiet. "This is surreal, 42 years. I started in quality control, checking widgets on an assembly line. Now here we are." He told stories: the Detroit contract, the expansion into aerospace parts, the time they almost lost everything in the 2008 crash but clawed back. People laughed and nodded. He was good at this, I realized, commanding a room, making people believe in his vision. Then his gaze found me in the crowd. I've been blessed in business, he said, voice carrying across the ballroom. In my personal life, well, that's been more complicated. My stomach tightened. My son Owen is here tonight, he continued. Several heads turned. Owen decided early on that he wanted nothing to do with the family legacy, went off to chase computers and code instead of learning the trade that put him through college. The room shifted, a few nervous laughs. I'll be honest, I didn't understand it, still don't. But I suppose every family has one child who doesn't quite measure up, the worthless son, as they say. The words landed like a slap. Emma's hand tightened around mine. I felt 300 pairs of eyes on me, some pitying, some curious, some enjoying the spectacle. Anyway, Dad said, his tone brightening, I'm grateful for the people who did stick around, the ones who understood what it means to build something real. He raised his glass. The crowd echoed the gesture. I stood frozen, scotch forgotten in my hand, and then the anger came. Not hot and explosive, but cold and clarifying. 32 years of this. 32 years of being dismissed, minimized, told I wasn't enough because I'd chosen a different path. I thought maybe tonight would be different. Maybe he'd acknowledge me just once with something other than contempt. I was done waiting. I set my glass down and walked toward the front of the room. The crowd parted as I moved forward. My father saw me coming and his expression shifted, surprise, then annoyance. I climbed the 3 steps to the small stage where the microphone stood. Owen, he said quietly, this isn't the time. I took the microphone from his hand. Harold Chen looked confused. My mother's face went pale. I'd like to say a few words, I said, voice steady despite my racing heart. Son, come on, Dad said, reaching for the mic. Let's talk later. No, I turned to face the crowd. I think now is perfect. Emma stood near the back, watching me with wide eyes. I could see Uncle Ray near the bar, drink halfway to his lips. The jazz quartet had stopped playing. Most of you know me as Calvin Morrison's son, I began, the one who walked away from the family business to pursue software development. The disappointment. A few uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the audience. What you might not know, I continued, is that the company I founded, Apex Logistics, was acquired last year. We specialized in supply chain optimization using AI and predictive analytics to reduce waste and improve efficiency in manufacturing. I saw a few nods from the younger executives. They understood. After that acquisition, I had resources, time, and I started thinking about legacy, about what it means to build something that lasts. My father stood beside me, jaw tight. Owen, enough. 6 months ago, I said, pulling the envelope from my pocket, I began conversations with Morrison and Fletcher's board of directors, specifically about a succession plan. Harold Chen straightened. A few board members in the crowd exchanged glances. You see, Dad, when you announced your retirement, the board faced a dilemma. You'd been grooming Mark Stephenson to take over, but Mark accepted a position with Lockheed Martin in March. That left a vacuum. I unfolded the papers slowly, so I made an offer. A comprehensive acquisition proposal that included retained leadership, protected jobs, and a commitment to keep manufacturing domestic. The board voted 3 weeks ago. My father's face had gone from red to white. You didn't. I did. I held up the signed agreement. As of Tuesday, I own controlling interest in Morrison and Fletcher. Effective January 1st, I'm the new CEO. The ballroom erupted. Gasps, shocked exclamations, a few scattered claps from people who weren't sure how to react. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth. Uncle Ray started laughing, a genuine, disbelieving laugh. You've got to be kidding, Dad said, his voice low and dangerous. I'm not. I turned to face him directly. You spent my whole life telling me I wasn't good enough, that I didn't understand real work. That I was worthless because I chose innovation over tradition. This is insane, he hissed. You can't just. I already did. My voice was calm now, anchored by years of stored-up frustration finally finding release. And here's what's going to happen. We're going to modernize. Update the production systems you've been running on 30-year-old software. Implement the logistics platform that'll cut our supply chain costs by 18%. Offer remote work options for administrative staff. You'll ruin everything I built. No, I said. I'll save it, because your way was dying, Dad. Profit margins down 4% year-over-year for the last 3 quarters. 2 major clients threatening to jump to competitors with better tech integration. You were so busy protecting your legacy that you couldn't see it was crumbling. Harold Chen stepped forward. Owen's right, Calvin. The board reviewed his proposal extensively. The company needs this. My father looked around, searching for allies. He found mostly stunned faces and a few nodding heads among the executives who understood the industry trends. You went behind my back, he said finally. Yes, I met his gaze. Just like you went behind mine every time you told people I was a failure, every time you introduced me as your son and then immediately qualified it with disappointment. I got tired of waiting for your approval. The room was silent except for the soft clink of ice in glasses. So here's what happens next, I continued. You're going to retire, enjoy your pension, travel with mom, play golf, whatever you want. And I'm going to run this company the way it should have been run 10 years ago. With your computer nonsense, with smart manufacturing, automation that protects jobs instead of eliminating them, sustainable practices that'll win us contracts with the companies actually growing right now. I folded the papers back into my pocket. You taught me one thing, Dad. You taught me that success matters more than approval, so thank you for that. I handed the microphone to Harold and walked off the stage. The crowd was still processing. I found Emma, who wrapped me in a hug. Holy shit, she whispered. You actually did it. I actually did it, I echoed, feeling strangely light. My mother appeared at my elbow. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. Owen, she said softly, we need to talk. Mom, tomorrow, she interrupted. Come to the house for breakfast, 9 o'clock, just you and me. She squeezed my arm and disappeared back into the crowd before I could respond. Uncle Ray materialized next, scotch in hand, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Kid, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Your father's over there looking like he swallowed a lemon. I glanced across the room. Dad stood surrounded by board members and executives, all talking at once. His expression was hard to read, shock, anger, something that might have been grudging respect, though I doubted it. Think he'll ever forgive me? I asked. Ray shrugged. Probably not, but maybe that's not the point. Emma tugged my hand. Let's get out of here. We've made our statement. We headed for the exit, and as we passed through the double doors, I heard someone call my name. I turned to find Harold Chen hurrying after us. Owen, wait, I stopped. Harold, that was unexpected, he said, slightly out of breath. But I meant what I said up there. The board believes in your vision. I appreciate that. There's going to be pushback from Calvin, from some of the old guard. I want you to know you have support. I nodded. Thank you. I'll need it. Harold hesitated. For what it's worth, your father's been impossible to work with for years. Brilliant, yes, but stubborn. We've been trying to convince him to update systems since 2019. Maybe now we'll actually get somewhere. We shook hands, and Emma and I stepped out into the cool October night. The hotel parking lot was nearly empty, just a few scattered cars under yellow streetlights. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs. You okay? Emma asked again. I thought about it. Yeah, I think I really am. We drove back to our hotel in comfortable silence, and I spent the drive wondering what tomorrow's breakfast with my mother would bring. The Morrison family house sat on 2 acres in a quiet suburb, the same house I'd grown up in. White colonial, black shutters, manicured lawn that Dad had always insisted on maintaining himself every Saturday morning. I pulled into the driveway at 8:55, Emma beside me for moral support. You sure you want me here? She asked. Absolutely. My mother opened the door before we reached it. She wore jeans and a soft blue sweater, her gray blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. It was the most casual I'd seen her in years. Come in, she said. Coffee's ready. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. A plate of fresh pastries sat on the island, and Mom poured 3 cups of coffee while Emma and I settled onto bar stools. Where's Dad? I asked. Golf course. I told him I needed the morning. We sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee. Finally, Mom set down her cup and looked at me directly. I'm not angry, she said. I blinked. You're not. Should I be? I just humiliated Dad in front of 300 people and took over his company. Mom smiled, a real smile, not the practiced one from last night. Owen, your father has been humiliating you for 32 years. Last night was balance, not cruelty. The words hung in the air. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. I should have stopped him, Mom continued. All those years of small cuts, the constant criticism, the way he'd dismiss your accomplishments like they didn't matter. I told myself it was just his way, that he loved you even if he couldn't show it. But that was cowardice on my part. Mom, let me finish. She took a breath. When you were 16, you won that national programming competition. Remember, you came home so excited, waving the certificate, and your father barely looked up from his newspaper. He said, "That's nice, but it won't help you understand real engineering." I remembered. I'd gone to my room and cried for the first time in years. "I found you later," Mom said. "You were sitting at your desk, staring at that certificate like it was evidence of failure instead of achievement. And I hugged you and told you he was proud, he just didn't know how to say it. But that was a lie, Owen. He wasn't proud. He was disappointed that you weren't him." She picked up a croissant and tore it into small pieces, not eating, just needing something to do with her hands. "I've spent 40 years loving a man who measures worth by how closely people mirror his own choices. And I've watched him damage you because you had the audacity to be your own person. So you're okay with what I did? I'm proud of what you did." Mom's eyes met mine. "You didn't just buy a company, you proved that your way works. That innovation and tradition can coexist, and you did it on your own terms." Emma spoke up. "Linda, does Calvin know you feel this way?" Mom laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "We had a long conversation last night after we got home. He called you ungrateful, disloyal, opportunistic. I told him he'd earned every bit of last night's surprise. How'd he take that? He slept in the guest room." She sipped her coffee. "This morning he left for golf without a word." We sat with that for a moment, then Mom reached across the island and took my hand. "Owen, I know I can't undo the past, but I want you to know I see you. I've always seen you. And what you've accomplished both in tech and now with Morrison and Fletcher is extraordinary." I felt my throat tighten. "Thanks, Mom. Now," she said, straightening up and dusting croissant crumbs from her hands, "tell me about your plans for the company, real details." So I did. For the next hour, I outlined my vision. Modernizing the factory floor with IoT sensors that would predict equipment failures before they happened, implementing flexible manufacturing protocols that could pivot production runs faster, creating partnerships with sustainable material suppliers. Launching an apprenticeship program with local community colleges to build the next generation of skilled workers. Mom listened intently, asking smart questions. She'd spent decades as the spouse of a CEO, attending industry events and absorbing more than she'd let on. "The workforce is your biggest challenge," she said. "A lot of those people have been there 20, 30 years. They're loyal to your father. You'll need to win them over." "I know. I'm planning facility visits next week. One-on-ones with department heads, town halls with floor workers. I want to hear their concerns directly." "Good." Mom nodded. "And don't underestimate the importance of small gestures. Your father stopped doing the annual 4th of July barbecue 5 years ago because he said it was too expensive. Bring that back. People remember when you care about community." Emma and I left around 11, promising to visit again soon. As we drove away, I glanced back at the house in the rearview mirror. Mom stood on the porch, waving. "Your mom's pretty great," Emma said. "Yeah, I'd forgotten that." The next week was a blur. I spent Monday through Wednesday at the Morrison and Fletcher headquarters in meetings with department heads, reviewing financials, touring the production floor. Harold Chen proved invaluable, introducing me to key players and helping smooth over the rough patches. The reaction from employees was mixed. The younger staff were excited about modernization plans. The older workers were wary, concerned that new ways meant layoffs and outsourcing. I held 4 town halls, standing in the middle of the factory floor with a microphone, taking questions. "Are you going to automate us out of jobs?" asked Tom Reeves, a machinist who'd been there 31 years. "No," I said. "Automation isn't about replacement. It's about augmentation. We're going to implement systems that make your jobs safer and more efficient, but we still need skilled operators who understand the craft. In fact, I'm budgeting for additional training so you can work alongside new technologies." "Your dad never needed fancy computers," someone else called out. "My dad built an incredible foundation," I replied. "But the industry's changing. Our competitors are investing in technology. If we don't adapt, we lose contracts. If we lose contracts, we lose jobs. I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen." Slowly, grudgingly, people started coming around. I made a point to learn names, to ask about families, to remember details from conversations. I ate lunch in the break room instead of the executive dining area. I wore steel-toed boots on the factory floor and let the production manager, Maria Gonzalez, teach me how the stamping press worked. My father, meanwhile, had gone silent. He didn't return my calls. Mom reported that he was spending a lot of time at the golf course and barely speaking at home. 2 weeks after the retirement party, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "From Calvin Morrison." I opened it. "Owen, I've had time to think. What you did was underhanded and humiliating. You made me look like a fool in front of everyone I've worked with for 4 decades. You took what I built and claimed it as your own. But Harold sent me your operational plans. I've reviewed them. Reluctantly, you're not wrong about the need for updates. I've known for years we were falling behind, but I didn't want to admit it. Didn't want to accept that my way was becoming obsolete. I'm not ready to forgive you. Maybe I never will be. But I'm also not ready to watch 42 years of work disappear because I'm too stubborn to acknowledge that you might actually know what you're doing. If you want my consultation, not my leadership, but my knowledge, I'm willing to talk on your terms." Dad, I read it 3 times. Emma read it over my shoulder. "That's probably the closest he'll ever get to an apology," she said. "I know. What are you going to do?" I thought about it, then I hit reply. "Dad, I'd like that. How about lunch next Tuesday? There's a project I could use your expertise on, retrofitting Building C without disrupting production. You know that facility better than anyone." Owen, his response came 20 minutes later. "Tuesday works. 12:30. I'll meet you at the office." I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. "Progress," Emma said. "Yeah. Strange, uncomfortable progress. That Sunday, Mom called to invite us to dinner. Your father agreed," she said. "It'll be civil, I promise." We showed up at 6 with a bottle of wine and low expectations. Dad opened the door. He looked older somehow, like the past 2 weeks had aged him. We shook hands, awkward, formal, and went inside. Dinner was pot roast, the same meal Mom had made for Sunday dinners throughout my childhood. We made small talk about weather, about Emma's work as a graphic designer, about nothing important. Then, as Mom served apple pie for dessert, Dad cleared his throat. "I read your proposal for the apprenticeship program," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's good, really good." I set down my fork. "Thanks, we should have done something like that years ago." He paused. "I should have done something like that years ago." Mom reached over and squeezed his hand. "I also saw your cost projections for the supply chain optimization," Dad continued. "If those numbers are accurate, we're looking at a significant competitive advantage within 18 months. They're accurate. I've run similar systems in 3 other manufacturing contexts." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe you know what you're doing after all." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close to the recognition I'd wanted as a kid, but it was something, an acknowledgement. "A crack in the wall. I learned from the best," I said quietly. "Even if I took a different path, you taught me about resilience, about fighting for what you believe in. I just wish we could have fought on the same side sooner." Dad's jaw worked. For a second I thought he might say something more, but he just nodded and returned to his pie. We finished dessert with lighter conversation, and as Emma and I got ready to leave, Dad stopped me at the door. "Tuesday," he said. "Building C, I've got some ideas." "I'm counting on it." He held out his hand, and this time when we shook, it felt less like a formality and more like a truce. 6 months later, I stood in the newly renovated lobby of Morrison and Fletcher's headquarters, watching employees stream past a digital wall displaying real-time production metrics, efficiency scores, and a rotating showcase of employee achievements. The company logo, redesigned to honor Calvin's original vision while incorporating modern aesthetics, hung above the reception desk in brushed steel. Emma arrived at noon carrying takeout from the Vietnamese place we'd discovered near the office. We ate in my office, Calvin's old office, which I'd redecorated with standing desks, whiteboards full of diagrams, and a couch for brainstorming sessions. "How's the Detroit expansion going?" she asked, unwrapping spring rolls. "Ahead of schedule. We broke ground last month, and if everything stays on track, the facility opens in August." The Detroit project was my pride and joy. A new manufacturing plant built from the ground up with sustainable practices, advanced robotics, and a partnership with Wayne State University's engineering program. We'd hired 50 people already, with plans to double that by year's end. "And your dad?" I smiled. "He's actually been helpful. He consulted on the facility layout, introduced me to 3 potential clients in the aerospace sector, and only second guesses my decisions about half the time now." "Progress," Emma said, echoing her words from months ago. The lunch meetings with Dad had become weekly standing appointments. We'd settled into an uneasy but functional dynamic. I ran the company, he offered advice when asked, and we carefully avoided talking about the past. Mom said he'd started attending a men's therapy group at their church, working through what she called retirement identity issues. I didn't ask for details. The 4th of July barbecue had been a massive success. 700 employees and their families showed up to the company picnic area we'd restored behind Building B. Dad had manned the grill alongside Tom Reeves, the machinist who'd questioned me at that first town hall. I'd watched them laugh together, trading stories about the old days, and felt something settle in my chest. My phone buzzed, a text from Harold Chen, board meeting at 2. Quarterly results are exceptional. Get ready for applause. I showed Emma the message. Guess the numbers are good. Of course they are, you're brilliant. I'm standing on 40 years of foundation, I corrected. Brilliant would be building it from scratch like he did. The board meeting confirmed Harold's prediction. Revenue was up 17% year-over-year. We'd landed 4 new major contracts. Employee satisfaction scores had jumped from 62% to 89%. Workplace safety incidents were down 35% thanks to new protocols and predictive maintenance systems. This is exactly what we hoped for, said board member Patricia Whitmore. Calvin built something strong, but you've made it sustainable for the next generation. After the meeting, I walked the factory floor like I did most afternoons. I stopped to chat with Maria about a production bottleneck in Building A, checked in with the quality control team about some supplier issues, and watched the new apprentices learning to calibrate laser cutting equipment. At 4:30, I found Dad waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his truck. He'd started stopping by once or twice a week, usually with some excuse about paperwork or questions about the pension plan. Hey, I said, what's up? Wanted to show you something. He pulled out his phone and opened a photo. Your mother and I are buying an RV. Taking that cross-country trip we've been talking about for 20 years. The image showed a massive silver Airstream. That's great, Dad. We're leaving in 3 weeks, 6 months on the road. He pocketed the phone, which means I won't be around to consult. I think I'll manage, he nodded. Yeah, you will. We stood there in the afternoon sun, and for the first time in my life, the silence between us didn't feel heavy. Owen, he said finally, I've been thinking about what I said at the retirement party. About you being what I called you. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He looked at me directly. You weren't worthless. You were different, and I couldn't handle that. I spent your whole life trying to make you into a copy of me instead of appreciating who you actually were. My throat tightened. Dad, let me finish. He took a breath. What you've done here, the innovation, the leadership, the way you've honored the foundation while building something new, it's better than anything I could have done. And I'm sorry it took me 65 years and a public embarrassment to see it. I didn't trust myself to speak. He stepped forward and did something he hadn't done since I was maybe 6 years old. He hugged me, awkward, brief, but real. I'm proud of you, he said. Should have said that 30 years ago. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. Mine were too. Thanks, Dad. He climbed into his truck and drove away, and I stood there watching until the taillights disappeared around the corner. That evening, Emma and I sat on our hotel balcony. We'd extended our stay indefinitely while house hunting in the area and watched the sun set over the city. You did it, she said. Everything you set out to do. I guess I did. How does it feel? I thought about the last 6 months, the long hours rebuilding trust with employees, the tense negotiations with suppliers and clients who weren't sure about the new leadership. The slow, painful thawing of my relationship with my father, the weight of carrying forward a legacy while carving my own path. It feels like work, I said. Really hard, really meaningful work, but good work. Yeah, good work. My phone buzzed with an email from Uncle Ray, subject line, proud of you, kid. The message was short, just a link to an industry article about Morrison and Fletcher's successful modernization and a note, you showed everyone how it's done. Drink soon, I smiled and showed Emma. The family's coming around. About time. We sat in comfortable silence as the sky shifted from orange to purple to deep blue. Somewhere in the city below, the factory was running its second shift, machines humming, workers executing the plans we'd spent months refining. In Detroit, contractors were pouring concrete for the new facility. In my father's driveway, an Airstream sat waiting for adventure. And in my pocket, right where the acquisition agreement had been 6 months ago, was a handwritten note from my mother that had arrived that morning. Owen, watching you transform the company while healing old wounds has been the greatest gift of my life. Your father may have built Morrison and Fletcher, but you gave it a future. More importantly, you gave our family a second chance. Love always, Mom. I'd read it 3 times and then tucked it away like a talisman. You know what's funny? I said to Emma. I spent my whole life trying to escape this place, trying to prove I didn't need it or him, and now I can't imagine being anywhere else. Emma leaned her head on my shoulder. That's not funny, that's perfect. A breeze picked up, carrying the smell of summer grass and distant rain. Tomorrow I'd be back in meetings, dealing with supplier negotiations and production schedules and the thousand small decisions that kept a company running. Next week, Dad would leave for his RV adventure, and I'd officially be steering this ship completely on my own. But tonight, I let myself feel the weight of what I'd accomplished. Not revenge, that had never really been the point. Instead, I'd reclaimed my own worth. I'd proven that different paths could lead to the same destination. I'd taken the foundation my father built and carried it forward into a future he couldn't have imagined. And maybe, finally, I'd made peace with the boy who'd sat in that corner office coloring pictures of rockets, hoping someone would notice. The factory lights glowed in the distance, steady and bright, and I thought, we're going to be okay, all of us.